This is CBN NewsWatch.
Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Today, federal authorities have a man in custody in connection to the potentially explosive devices sent across the country. Cesar Sayoc Jr. is the suspect. Officials say he is a 56-year-old man living in Aventura, Florida. At least a dozen packages were sent to frequent critics of President Trump in recent days. The president addressed the situation this afternoon at the 2018 Young Black Leadership Summit at the White House.
These terrorizing acts are despicable and have no place in our country.
Law enforcement officials say these bomb threats are legitimate acts of domestic terrorism and fear more devices could exist. CBN News national security correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now. Eric, what are your sources telling you led to the suspect's arrest?
Well, Mark, my sources inside the FBI are telling me that it was actually DNA that was coming off of some of the envelopes, and that is what led to his arrest. And also, they may have possibly had a fingerprint off of some of the black tape that was around the bombing packages themselves. And that black tape is currently being sent off right now. They've been able to match up the DNA to that to the suspect. Again, he is a 56-year-old man from the South Florida area. They didn't want to pick him up, I heard, from his home for fear of having more explosives. So they ended up picking him up when he actually went out and was near an auto zone in the area. He had been under surveillance for the past 24 hours. And the big thing is that they wanted to pick him up away from his house so that just in case he had more bomb-making material inside of his home.
Eric, the person arrested is a 56-year-old Florida man. What else can you tell us about him?
Well, I tell you what, when authorities actually picked up his van, if you take a look at his van, it is just literally covered. Every single window has some sort of political statement. It even has pictures and the seal of President Trump, has pictures of Vice President Mike Pence, and then it has the crosshairs as if you would look through a scope of pictures of Hillary and different Democrats, where it actually has them in the crosshairs themselves, along with a couple of derogatory slogans against CNN.
Have you heard anything about what may have motivated him to target the people that he did?
As of right now, no. That's the big question right now that authorities really want to get answered is why is it that this person was after, so many of these Democratic leaders and to find out. So they're questioning him right now. I do understand that the van has been taken over to a lab in Miramar, Florida, and that lab will actually comb through and be able to bring more evidence to light and possibly what led to this man. They're also looking at his background as well, besides questioning him, talking to his friends, talking to his family, to find out what set him off.
And I have one more quick question for you. These devices, none of them exploded. Was that intentional? Was this just to strike fear, or was he attempting? Have you heard any more as far as was he allegedly attempting for these bombs to explode?
Well, I heard from several of my sources that the bombs were actually, they were functional, meaning that there was enough explosive there and the wires and the timers and everything were there, but none of them were set correctly. So it's either that this guy didn't know how to set these things correctly. Even some of my sources said some of the wires were actually put on in the wrong places. So that is definitely good news if, in fact, he did want to have these things explode when they were open. But the FBI has been able to open them up, has been able to examine them, and that is where they've been able to collect this DNA evidence, which led to this 56-year-old man's arrest.
And again, we just want to make sure we clarify he is a suspect right now. We need to make sure.
Suspect
yes.
Right now, that is correct.
Now tell us about, I guess there's a news conference coming up this afternoon. What can we learn from that?
That's right. The Department of Justice is holding a news conference at 2:30, just in about 25 minutes from now. But what's very interesting about that is, first of all, the Department of Justice was the one who tweeted it out. It was actually Sarah Flores. She is the one who works she is basically the personal assistant for Secretary Jeff Sessions. And it's interesting that when she tweeted it out saying that we have caught the guy and the suspect is in custody and we're going to be having more in this news conference, that's interesting that having the Department of Justice actually come forward and say as much as they're saying, because unless they have very, very good evidence, very good DNA evidence that ties this man, they're usually the ones who are kept very quiet and like to keep, not to show all their cards necessarily, especially to the defense out there as well, because more than likely this guy is going to get a defense attorney. But it's interesting that they were the ones who ended up putting it out there that we have caught the suspect and he is in custody and no one has been hurt. But just having the Department of Defense, the one making the announcement, was very interesting and telling.
All right, Eric Rosales, thanks so much for that update.
You got it. Thank you, Mark.
The Senate race in Florida highlights a deep divide. As Abigail Robertson shows us, voters in the Sunshine State have to choose between two political giants.
The 2018 Florida Senate race is a clash of the titans, with two-time Republican Governor Rick Scott trying to unseat longtime Democratic incumbent Senator Bill Nelson.
This race is destined to be tight till the very end, because Florida is a very polarized state.
Longtime Florida political analyst Susan McManus tells CBN News early estimates look like the margin of victory could be 1%.
Partisanship is very deep in this state. The stakes are high. Money is rolling into this race from outside the state, obviously because Democrats are holding on for dear life to that seat.
And Republicans are giving it their all to win it over. With 28% of the state registered as no party, however, Governor Scott's walking a fine line as to how closely he associates with President Trump.
Governor Scott has a really tough time because he knows that he's got to capture a certain part of that no party affiliation independent vote, and he's got to continue to hold on to Republicans and at the same time try to think about some of those conservative Democrats in the panhandle that might vote for him.
McManus calls Florida the most difficult state for campaigning because of its diversity and size. Statewide candidates must be careful on sensitive issues like gun control.
The issue itself plays quite differently depending upon where you are in Florida.
For example, rural voters see guns as necessary protection, while urban voters associate the weapons with two deadly events still fresh in their mind.
They have to talk about issues that are important to Florida, how to fix things.
Republican voters argue Nelson has been in office far too long.
He's a career politician at this point.
Senator Nelson is probably a great man, but he hasn't been in Florida in a long time.
Democrats believe he's done a good job fighting for Medicare, Social Security, and protecting Obamacare.
I like his stance on the issues.
McManus says at this point, it's still anyone's guess.
There's still what would be considered a lifetime between now and November.
Senator Nelson easily won his past elections, but Republicans are hopeful that with Governor Scott, they finally have a chance at defeating him. Reporting from Tampa, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
CBN News will have special coverage on election night from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Time on November 6th. Make sure you tune in. Another strong report for the U.S. economy today. It grew at a 3.5% annual rate in the third quarter. That's slightly better than expected, and that comes on the heels of a strong 4.2% growth rate in the second quarter. President Trump and congressional Republicans are likely to point to the excellent numbers as proof that the GOP tax cut is working and boosting the economy up to faster growth than it was experiencing before the president took office. Updating a story now that CBN News continues to follow, the state of Oregon dismissed criminal charges against a judge who says he was targeted for his Christian beliefs. Charges against Judge Vance stem from his time as the judge presiding over the Marion County Veterans Treatment Court and his interactions with a Navy SEAL who was a convicted felon and defendant in that court. Earlier this week, I spoke with Judge Day by Skype for an update. Judge Day, for those that are not familiar with your case, briefly summarize it and tell us why the charges were dismissed.
Well, there are two cases, Mark. First was an ethics case relating to a variety of issues, but the main one, the sole reason I believe the ethics case was there, because I quietly recused myself from performing any same-sex marriages, a job that, or something that I don't have to do as a judge. I don't have to marry people. But out of that, when I began to fight back and say, no, I'm not going to give up my position, I'm not going to resign, the state of Oregon decided to charge me with 2 felonies for something that never happened. And that is, I went out to help a veteran in my veterans treatment court, a court that is designed to wrap around those participants and help them and care for them. He had no heat in the dead of winter. He lived way out in the forest on a farm that in a hovel. And my son and I went out there to help him. My son was his friend. While I was fixing the pellet stove, my son brought in an unloaded gun that he had purchased. He showed it to the Navy SEAL. The Navy SEAL picked it up, showed him a SEAL move, and put it in the box. Well, the SEAL was a felon, and I was working on the pellet stove. I didn't even think about that. It doesn't matter to me, really, in the context of that Good Samaritan Act. Well, because of that, the state of Oregon decided to charge me with aiding and abetting that felon, that Navy SEAL, with holding that gun.
They went ahead and decided to dismiss all charges. Why was that? Why was that decision made?
Well, for a couple of different reasons. The Navy SEAL in question gave noble service to our country, in my opinion. He came back pretty bruised and broken in many ways, and I think the state realized that he wasn't going to come. He refused to show up. He refused to testify. And they didn't do their job, in my opinion. If I was the Attorney General, I would have subpoenaed that witness. I would have made sure. I would have sent somebody down to his home and made sure that he showed up. I mean, that's the obligation of the prosecutor. If they're going to charge somebody with a crime, they better be able to prove it. And the state couldn't prove it without that one witness.
Do you feel like it was divine intervention that at the last minute the charges were dropped?
Well, you know, the 2 Chronicles 16:9 is kind of one of my life verses. And it says, you know, the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the whole earth to find those whose hearts are completely his. Why, we ask? That he may show himself strong on their behalf. My family is deeply committed to the Lord. I've been a believer for 43 years. I know the joy of the Lord in trials. It's been people say, well, gosh, this must have been a terrible experience. Yeah, it has been. But God is relentlessly kind.
So what does the future hold for you? Is there a chance you will practice on the bench once again?
How I get back on the bench, or if I get back on the bench, that's in his hands, and therefore the outcome is his. I'm going to manage the process with him and take this adventure, and I'm not sure what the next step is, but when you adventure with Jesus, it always ends up to be a wonderful experience.
Once again, Judge Vance Day there. Well, coming up Monday on CBN NewsWatch, an interview with former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. McDonnell is a friend of Judge Day, who is no stranger to the courts himself. The United States Supreme Court voted unanimously to overturn McDonnell's political corruption conviction. On Monday, the former governor will share his insights on Judge Day's situation. Well, coming up, persecuted for faith. We're going to bring you the latest developments in the Asiya Bibi case. Welcome back. The plight of a Pakistani Christian accused of blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad continues to gather international outrage. Asiya Bibi was sentenced to death in 2010 after she allegedly drank water from a cup shared by Muslim women. She appealed the conviction and is now awaiting a final ruling from Pakistan's Supreme Court. This week, the president of the European Parliament urged Pakistan to release Bibi.
I would like to highlight the case of Asiya Bibi, a woman belonging to a Christian minority in Pakistan who risked being hanged. Asiya Bibi has unleashed the fury of some women over a drinking cup. According to them, contact with a Christian made the water impure. After being attacked and denounced for blasphemy, Asiya Bibi now risks being hanged. I call on the Pakistani authorities to guarantee that she receives a fair trial and any form of discrimination and prejudice are avoided.
CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas joins us now with more on this case. George, Pakistan's highest court was supposed to rule on the case earlier this month. What exactly happened?
So what my sources are saying, they had folks inside the courtroom. The understanding is that the judge, in a historic move, really listened to testimony from both the defendant and the prosecution for about 3 hours. And the three-panel judge asked some very, very tough questions that gave human rights activists hope that Asiya Bibi could be released. At the end of the proceedings, Mark, the judges announced that they've come to a verdict, they've come to a conclusion, but walked out of the court without delivering that verdict. And part of the reason, my sources say, is because this is a highly political and a very potentially dangerous case in the sense of the repercussions that could happen if it goes either way. And so I think there's a calculation on the part of the government. They want to have their sort of ducks in a row before the judge the judges present their verdict.
What is the United Nations position on Asiya Bibi's case?
Silence. Antonio Guterres, who is the UN Secretary General since assuming the leadership of the UN body in 2017, has been totally silent, while the UN body has criticized, for example, France's ban on the Islamic hijab, the burqa, and this particular UN General Secretary has been very vocal about the death penalty. As you know, Asiya Bibi, if she is convicted, if the court upholds the conviction, she could be sentenced to death, hung in essence. And the UN body has been completely silent. And what my sources are saying, those who work the UN and have been appealing on her behalf, because of the large number of countries that are Muslim dominated, or over 50 countries, majority Muslim countries, and they have put pressure on this UN body to keep silent.
Give us some background here. She's accused of blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad.
That's right.
What does that mean?
Let me tell you exactly what the words that has caught her, put her in trouble. On June 14th, 2009, she was working the field. She was dying of thirst. She walks to this well and takes a cup of water, drinks it, goes back to take another cup. A Muslim woman says that you have, in essence, desecrated this well by coming here and drinking because you're a Christian. And she responds, Asiya Bibi responds to the woman who is a Muslim. She says, quote, "I believe in Jesus Christ who died on the cross for the sins of mankind. What did your Prophet Muhammad ever do to save mankind?" Those words have put her in prison for the last 10 years and could potentially lose her life in the process. We need to continue praying for Asiya Bibi.
Yes, most definitely. All right, our senior international correspondent, George Thomas. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay. Still ahead, an Atlanta football player is showing his faith on the field in a major way. Up next, we'll show you how. Alabama Crimson Tide quarterback Tua Tagovailoa is known for being a great football player. He's also known for his faith on and off the field. Here with more on this rising college football star's faith is CBN sports reporter Sean Brown. Welcome, Sean.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Good to be here, man.
First of all, tell us about Tua as a player. I hear his stats are just amazing, and the big national championship win, of course.
Yes, man. This cat here, man, I tell you, coming in as a freshman last year, throwing a 41-yard touchdown pass to help the Tide win the national championship, shows his poise. This year coming in, stats are off the charts. In just 8 games, he's got roughly a total yards of 2,066. I mean, just killing them. Heisman Trophy candidate. I mean, it's just, he's killing them right now. So that's just a few stats. So he's doing his thing right now. The boy can ball.
And he's telling reporters that his life, including football, is all centered around God.
It is. Check out this quote. Your will be done in me, and the rest will follow. That's a quote I took from him as he was responding to reporters about his faith. That's the guy he is. That's surrenderance. It says, you know what? At some point, what I can do with my body, it has a limit. I'm going to have to get in my mind somehow, and Lord, I need your help with that. It's surrenderance. I love it.
And he even says that his decision to go to Alabama to play ball for them was based on his faith.
Now, there's an interesting story. He's got all these college offers. Pastor comes to him and says, hey, I believe Alabama is your place. They give him a prophecy. The prophecy comes from Isaiah 60:30, and the prophecy is, nations will come to your light and kings to the brightness of your rising. They say you will be ushered into a platform, and it's a platform that you will glorify God. That's the prophecy he's handed as he has all of these college choices. Now, if you're handed that prophecy and the pastor says, I think Alabama might be it, what would you do? So it's panned out fairly well for him to accomplish so much in just a short amount of time.
That's awesome. I got chills when you were talking about that prophecy, chills in a good way. Well, I understand that the Reverend Franklin Graham even praised him for his faith, right? Quickly.
I mean, if you see that, it's a young athlete who's unashamed of his faith. I mean, he has taken every opportunity when the camera's on him to say, this is who I am and I'm not ashamed. It's a wonderful thing. And everyone that could hear that would just be wise to just listen to the guy. He's awesome. He's awesome.
All right. Our CBN sports reporter, Sean Brown. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me, brother.
All right. You bet. Well, there's much more of CBN NewsWatch still ahead. Welcome back. An unbelievable image of a teenage boy with a gun pointed to his head by bullies and a group of young football players standing for their faith are trending on FaithWire this week. Here's CBN's Jessica Chaco.
Well, a Missouri mother is outraged after a video emerged of bullies pointing a gun at her teenage son's head. The group could be seen hitting and taunting 13-year-old Darren Weddle while recording it on their phones. Dan, this is a horrifying story. What can you tell us?
Yeah, well, the mom was outraged because she knew her son had been bullied, but she didn't know the extent of it until she saw the video that had been going viral online. And even more shocking, what puts it over the edge from a normal bullying videos, which are bad enough, one of the kids seems to be holding a gun right to his head. And so that's a pretty serious incident. And then the mom was outraged because she didn't think the authorities were taking it seriously enough. But since that time, the 17-year-old has turned himself in, and 2 of the other teens involved in the incident are also in custody.
Dan, part of the other thing that makes this story so horrifying is that the son, Darren, is autistic. And so it seems that they were bullying someone who really couldn't defend themselves at all. Are there going to be any repercussions for their behavior?
Yeah, I mean, they charged him with a first-degree robbery charge, which is a felony in Missouri. And according to the law there, that he could face 10 to 30 years in prison, depending on what they do.
We'll be following that story more. But next up, a pastor in Georgia is banned from praying with his local football team when an atheist group complained. But Pastor Russell Davis and his team haven't given up. Dan, tell us more about this inspiring story.
Yeah, well, the video went viral. It was a great video where this pastor who came in and was invited in by coaches and staff to lead a prayer before the game. And he talked about brotherhood, and really that's really what the thrust of the prayer was about, and how they need to carry their brother's cross. And it was kind of like an analogy to Christ. And then they prayed just for protection before the game. And of course, the Freedom from Religion Foundation, they make a habit of complaining about these sorts of incidences. So they were able to get them to comply and to not do the prayer and not have the pastor come in and do the prayer. But the team decided to find a way around it. And it's totally okay for the students to lead their own prayer. And so that's what they continue to do.
Well, we love this video. And if you want to watch the video of the Dawson County Tigers praying with Pastor Davis, visit faithwire.com or check out the FaithWire Facebook page. Back to you.
Great video to see that prayer there. Well, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.